Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. And we are so excited to have you here to kick off day 3 of the Diversity Reboot Summit. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a big fan of the work that PowerToFly does. So thank you.
I love it. Well, before we get started, I just want to kind of dive in a little bit more about all of you, the things that you've done in the past, and then also bring us up to speed with where you are now. And so, like Meg had mentioned, you are an author, speaker, and former editor-in-chief of 17 magazine, and your focus is to really help women in the next generation of leaders see their potential and step into their power at work, in relationships, and in their lives. We're going to dive into a ton of information about that. But Ann, you're joining us today to talk a little bit about your company, New Power Media, and its goal of creating communities of men and women who are devoted to helping each other achieve and succeed. So I would love to just kick it off with talking a little bit about New Power Media. So can you tell us more about the company and also why you wanted to start it?
So thank you, first of all, for having me here. And thank you, Sienna, for your energy today. I can see the sunshine beaming from your corner of the world. I appreciate that. Although it's pretty nice here too. I'm in New York City and it's a pretty great day today. When I talk about building your career and building your life, right? There are the things you do, the skills you have, and then the things that are meaningful to you. And what has been most meaningful to me in my career, right? You're right. I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm an editor, I'm a brand builder. But what has been most meaningful to me in my life is helping women step into their power. And my whole career, except for a couple of jobs where I was the doer and not the thinker, my whole career has been about finding new ways to help women step into their power. I was on the launch team of Cosmo Girl magazine. I was the editor-in-chief of 17 for the better part of a decade. That generation of young women who grew up with me, who really are millennial women, I wrote The Big Life as a roadmap to help them learn how to put their life together, because I could see from where I was sitting as editor-in-chief of 17 that this was a generation that saw power and work and success differently than previous generations. So I wrote The Big Life as a way to say, I see you and I want to pave the way for you to move forward in the world. It's such a funny thing. I suspect we have a pretty millennial audience here, and it has been my entire mission to wait for the day we can stop saying young women and just start saying women when we talk about millennial women, because now millennials are like really stepping into their power, right? They're stepping into leadership positions. Millennials are 40. And so it really is, it is the generation that grew up with me. They are really owning their power and stepping into positions of power. So after I wrote The Big Life, I spent 3 or 4 years traveling the country. 3 years. The book is about to have its 4th year anniversary. So I spent 3 years. Thank you. Traveling the country, talking to young women about the way they saw power and success and work differently. And there was a piece missing. There was the piece where I could say, I know you see power differently. I know there are companies that need your thought leadership, that need the way you think about the world. I wanted to put the two together. So at the end of last year, I launched New Power Media with a very straightforward mission. It was my chance to use my power and my privilege and my connections and my career's worth of equity that I had built up to help connect the next generation of leaders with the companies that want to see them rise and succeed. And of course, the universe was like, that's a great idea, but you're going to have to figure out some other way to do it, because here's 2019. Here comes 2020. And we're about to have a huge, and get ready to spend a lot of time indoors. And so the company pivoted, right? And needed to retrench. And in the middle of last year, I acquired a community called TheLi.st. You saw the logo was up on the screen at the beginning, and I acquired TheLi.st, which is a pioneering community, digital first, digital only, that is about high impact women. So here are the women who were leading New Power, right? These are women who are in positions of power. They are CEOs, they are journalists, they are TED speakers, and they are the thought leaders who are redefining what it means to be powerful. And so New Power Media has really sort of two important missions, right? We are the thought leaders that are ushering in a new dynamic of power and connecting companies with the ideas and with the talent that they need to succeed. That's a long story, but that's what brings us here today.
No, but it's amazing. I was like, and I'm so glad for that long story, because again, I always think it's amazing to look behind the scenes, right? And so for everyone who's listening right now, it's very easy to say, okay, well, and she's done X, Y, and Z, but to really hear the mission, the reason behind why you do what you do, and then also to kind of see that underlying thread of like, well, all the work that I've done has had the same mission of being able to help and empower women to step into the power that they already have and embody. And so something that really resonated with me when you were sharing is kind of talking about the fact that power looks different for each individual, right? And I think something that is so important to lean into is the fact that a lot of the time society tells women that we don't or we shouldn't have access to power, or that power and privilege or whatever it might be has to look a certain way based on who we are. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit around just like your thoughts of how as women can we break through some of those limiting beliefs for those who are listening who want to step into their power, but they're not really sure what that even looks like.
Thank you. That is absolutely right. It's hard to see yourself as powerful when you look around and the rest of the world seems to see a dynamic of power that is male, that is white, that is top down, hierarchical, loudest voice, biggest stick, closed door meetings. And part of the mission of New Power is for people to see themselves as powerful, to step into their power, but also to make the world see it too. Because they don't, right? We're still so focused on how much money and how many followers and all these kind of external expressions of power that are frankly like old power. And what I learned in writing The Big Life, in being editor-in-chief of 17, in the years that I spent traveling across the country speaking to young women, is that the next generation wants power that is transparent, accountable, collaborative, and diverse. And I say it like that sounds so obvious to you and me, but I can't tell you the number of times that I've been in a room and I see clouds go across people's faces. They're like, yeah, that's not what power looks like.
Right?
And I'm like, who says, right? That's what makes you powerful. And frankly, the idea that power is outside of yourself, right? That it's something else that sits over here and that you have to form yourself into some like really rigid idea of what power looks like. I want to make power move into who you are, into your authenticity. And I don't mean it like I really want to one day kumbaya. I mean, like I am out there on the streets doing the work, talking to people, talking to companies, connecting thought leaders to make anybody who did not feel powerful, who felt outside of this old idea of power, to see themselves as powerful and to make the world recognize it too.
No, it's so impactful. And like, again, when you were sharing that, I was like, that's the furthest thing from kumbaya, because when you think about it, my background way back in the days in psychology, and a lot of the times it's like, I can tell you that you're powerful 17 million times, but if you don't actually believe it, because you're saying, well, I'm not worthy of power, or because whatever that might be for you, it's going to be really hard for you to actually be able to step into that, so that when you have opportunities or chances or the right conversations, you won't actually believe it. So you won't embody that. And so what you were saying about authenticity and also that sense of transparency, I think that it's something that's so important for us to also understand that like our story, our experience is what makes us who we are. And it's not so much, was like, this is maybe aging me, but like keeping up with the Joneses, right? Nowadays, how many followers or what company you work for instead, but instead actually saying like, what is our mission? What is our purpose in life? And how can we find power in exactly who we are? And I want to talk to you really quickly about something. I'd love to hear a little bit more on the company side, right? So when we're talking about New Power Media, you're saying that you want to be able to connect women to different companies as well. And so I'd love to hear what are some of the biggest struggles that you might have found since starting and actually being able to make that connection.
Well, let's talk about the pandemic. I mean, honestly, that's been the biggest challenge. But the pandemic did a lot of things for us, right? One, it made us aware of what's important. And it feels like Pollyanna to say that, but I think it's 100% true, right? That things that weren't working for us needed to be re-examined. It allowed us, the fact that we're sitting here having a Zoom conference rather than crammed into a conference room with like bad tinny coffee is or having like a happy hour with really like weak Chardonnay is actually, I find this to be really inspiring. The fact that you and I are frankly like half a world apart and we can have this conversation. I think that has really brought us together and has created a greater diversity, right? There's this old idea, right, that there's only room at the table, but now the table is so much bigger because it's digital. There's endless room at the table. We have to learn how to be heard in these rooms, right? How to support each other in these rooms. But suddenly the conference room is a lot bigger. It is global. It is a lot more diverse. I'll tell you that the biggest challenge is this is something I learned from a woman who's on the list, whose name is Christina Blacken, who is an amazing leadership coach and trainer, and I highly recommend everybody to look her up. I was interviewing her for a series that we called Unmuted. The idea was, how do you learn to be unmuted in a space like this? So I said to Christina, I said, listen, I'm on a mission to convince people that they need to see a new dynamic of power. And she said to me, stop convincing people. You will never convince somebody to give up their power to see your way of seeing things. She said, stop convincing people, just gather your people, gather people who see the world your way and mobilize them and bring them together. And soon the world will spin around to seeing things the way you see them. And that to me was such an eye-opening conversation, right? This idea that don't waste your energy. Don't waste your energy on people who don't see the world your way. And I am encouraged that more companies are starting to see the possibilities, right? Are opening, and change is hard and slow, right? It's really complicated, especially if you're talking about big corporations where there's a lot of layers of hierarchy. It doesn't mean that it's never going to happen. It might mean that it's not going to happen right this second, but the value in bringing your tribe together and finding new ways to express your power in the world, you will find your people.
Absolutely. And I love that. And really quickly, something that's, so many things are resonating with me, but taking a couple of steps back to what you were saying about the table now being bigger, something that reflects with what you were saying before is a sense of vulnerability and authenticity in the fact that we're both in our houses, right? Like we can resonate over the fact that we have the same plants in our backgrounds, right? And actually being able to say, like, when we also think about power, I think something that happens a lot of the times is we view other individuals who we seem to be powerful and instead say, well, I could never be like her, or I could never aspire to be like that because we're so different, or because whatever internal conversation we're having with ourselves. But with the fact that everything is so digital now and we all are more human because we're all at home with ourselves, with our families, if we have them. It allows for us to connect on a deeper level, and also to connect outside of just, here's what I do, here's my resume or CV, depending on where you're based in the world, and here are all of my accolades, but instead going back to like, this is who I am, and these parts of me is also what might be able to help me connect in a deeper way. I love that.
Bringing your whole self to work is like, work is coming to my whole self.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting at my desk, and this part right here is very carefully organized for a Zoom. This part of my desk right on the other side is a stack of papers and some fragrant candles and my powder, should I get shiny. And then if you look just over here to my left, it's my kids' desks, right? And so work has come to my whole life, and there's no way that I could really hide, right? I couldn't not bring my whole self to work. If my daughter is having a meltdown, like, she's going to make sure that she gets my attention before whatever is happening. So that's another like weird benefit of the pandemic, which is this idea that like millennials want transparency. You can't not be transparent now. Like you cannot not be authentic. And not just like we need to see women's work, right? There's been a lot of that conversation around like working women during the pandemic and the children that they have to take care of often. But to see how men work, how everybody works, right? To see that like people have lives outside of the office. And I actually think that that's a nice thing for us to be able to see into. I'm interested that other women in this room, because we have such a small group, I feel like I want to like engage them in the conversation, even the other two. I feel like I don't want to feel like I'm like calling it out to a whole room. I see we've got a small group. We can have like a really honest conversation about like what comes next and where do we have to go, unless we're like on a larger streaming and we have to keep everybody off.
Yeah, no worries. We are on a larger streaming, so you're being seen by thousands of people all over. So that's fine. But we are getting some questions in from the wider community. So I want to ask you a couple of those just because we're getting some great questions. For example, Jill Polgar is asking, why do you think it's uncomfortable to say out loud that we have power?
Because we've not been told that it's okay to talk about it. Words like ambition and power and even success are not words that are very easy for a lot of women to own. And it is largely generational. I will tell you, during my book tour with The Big Life, Diane von Furstenberg, bless her, and she's an icon and an amazing champion for women, and threw me one of my very first book parties, and it was a wonderful event. And in the middle, I started to talk about the ambition of women and how I wanted to, and it's funny to even say this now because I feel like the conversation has moved so quickly. It was in 2017. And I said to her, I talked about normalizing ambition, to talk about your ambition. And she said, oh, I don't know. I don't like that word. And I just said, like, I hate to say this. I said, with all due respect, Diane, like, we have to normalize the idea that women are ambitious. And ambitious doesn't mean backstabbing and ladder climbing and at success at all expenses. Ambition means wanting what you want and knowing that you deserve it. And that's it. It doesn't have to be, I want to be the CEO. I mean, in fact, it's such an old idea, the CEO, prop your feet on your desk, the Louboutins, all the old trappings of what success looked like, right? That's a really old power, that the power comes from saying, this is what I want in the world. This is the expression that I want to have in the world. And I'm going to claim it. And I think that even to say ambition, right? To say I'm ambitious, that's the first step. And once you start to see your success reflected back to you in the world, you can start to see yourself as powerful.
I love that. And also just like going back to what we were saying before of owning it and finding your people, right? So it's not about trying to convince everyone, but it's about to say, how can I find the people that I need to and have that impact? And then also realize that when we think about it, it's a ripple effect because, okay, well, we're considering ourselves powerful. So we're going out, we're doing the things, whatever that might be. And then just seeing other individuals or other women living that life, they'll say, oh, well, if Ann can do it, or if Lisa, or if Meg, or if Sienna, or whoever that might be, well, maybe I can too. And then that's how we kind of spark this great and fantastic change. I love it.
That's my like second favorite thing to talk about is the power of community, right? And the power of people, surrounding yourself around with people who are devoted to helping you achieve and succeed. The Big Life, the book, The Big Life, spawned a community of early and mid-career women called the Badass Babes. And this is a community of women who saw power and success differently and needed to bring people around them that also saw the world this way. And if there are any early and mid-career women here who need that support, please find us on, there's two ways you can sign up. You can sign up on our Facebook group, or you can go to AnnShoket.com and there's a tab for Badass Babes, and you can very easily sign up there. That the Badass Babes community has really been tremendous at supporting each other, at trading job ideas, about talking about the nuances, the intersection of ambition and life, right? How does it affect the partners that you date? How does it affect your relationships with your parents? How does it affect your relationships with your boss? and so that has been a really beautiful community.
Yeah. I love that. And also I was like, I'm glad we're talking about community. It's one of my favorite topics as well, especially just because something that you mentioned is the importance of being able to see others like you going through similar situations, right? And so when you're talking about your community like Badass Babes, it's saying, okay, well, how are we finding our people? And then finding a way to that community over competition kind of phrase, right? Of being able to say, it's not, and this is something that happens quite often actually. So I also and also in this room alone, like I run a community for women of color who are interested in moving abroad. The lovely Seppi from PowerToFly runs a woman for women over 30 who want to reinvent their life. And so really asking ourselves, like, it's not saying, well, I have to be the only Black woman that does X, Y, and Z, or the only woman of color, whatever that is, but instead say, hold on, how can we start changing the narrative of going from like scarcity of, well, also when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, well, companies want to check off of a box, so I need to be the only woman or the strongest woman or the loudest woman. And really it's like, no, hold on. How can we come together to really elevate and bring one another up and lean into that support and representation of what's possible?
That is so, thank you for that, for talking about collaboration over competition, because that's the really important change that I think the next generation of women have led. When I was coming up in the world, there wasn't a lot of collaboration. We were all kind of eyeing each other's papers and thinking like, well, what grade is she? What did she put for answer number 2, right? We were all comparing ourselves against each other because we saw power as a pie. We thought if her piece gets bigger, my piece is going to get smaller. The next generation, this new dynamic of power is about the pie getting bigger. Right? We are all working together to get this pie to be bigger. So the community that I acquired earlier this year, TheLi.st, and this is this is a community for more experienced women, high impact women. So it's TheLi.st, and I please encourage everybody to come check us out. This community, before I acquired it, I was a member for 5 years, and it was probably the single most important piece of my professional growth, to be surrounded by successful, high impact women with big ambitions who were also devoted to helping each other achieve and succeed, but put real muscle behind it, right? I will make this connection for you. I am happy to spend 20 minutes talking to you about this thing. I want to unlock new opportunities for you. I want to educate you to really be supportive of each other, and at the same time to talk about, again, that friction that when you are an ambitious woman and you can name and claim what you want to achieve in the world, it creates a lot of friction. And who supports you, right? Who holds you up when the world is like the headwinds are at you, right? You don't have the wind at your back when you're feeling like there's a lot of fight. And so the list has really been important in that. And what's amazing about them is that they really are leading the way for so many others. They're the leaders of so many industries and so many businesses that they're leading the way in their own worlds. That's going to really be game changing. But community, even, look, if it's not the Badass Babes and it's not the list and you're not traveling globally, right? Or you're not under 30, like there's a lot of community out there that wants to unlock secrets, right? That wants to pave the way for you. And you can't do it alone. You cannot do big things alone. You need other women, other people to support you. And that is really, relationships are everything. And it's not like, it feels obvious, right? Like, of course relationships are anything, but I'll tell you, when I was coming up in like a traditional corporate hierarchy, literally, like I'd go like this is the tower that I worked in. You could inch your way close. You wanted to inch your way closer to the 43rd floor, right? That was the executive floor. There was no sense of community, right? There was no sense that we're all in this together and that we want to help each other achieve and succeed. And I didn't even know it was possible. And when I was in that really traditional corporate hierarchy job, and which is not to say there's anything bad about that, right? Like, but it's hard to know what you need if you can't see it. And so for all the women and everybody who's here who may not feel supported, or you're not entirely sure who your network is or who your community is, take a look outside, right? There's a difference between your friends and the people who want to help you rise. That's one. But take a look outside of your world, right? Are there other women who have the same core values as you, who could be important to your success? And then offer to help them. And you have to, if you want someone to help you, you have to help them. You have to show up for them, right? That's the key. That's, if everybody says, well, how do I find these magic women? I'm like, you find a woman that you think is doing the most amazing thing and ask her how you can help her. Show up to her event, volunteer, donate, connect, offer to make an introduction. That's the way to build your network and your community.
I love this. And then really quickly, before we take in a couple more questions from the audience, something that I also wanted to lean in is when you were talking about the tower, right? And wanting to get up to the 43rd floor. I think it was 43rd or 42nd. Okay. Something that I also think is so important, and actually Issa Rae talks about this a lot and always really stuck with me, of like, instead of focusing on always networking up, also focus on like, how can you network across or diagonally, And so instead of saying, okay, well, how can I get in the room with the CEO? Instead, maybe be able to say, okay, well, how can I get in the room with like the manager who might be able to help me out, or the person who's kind of maybe starting a business and we're starting off at the same time, whatever that might look like. And so went on a side note, but that's fine.
Well, I wanted to say I'm a big fan of Issa's, and it's interesting. Issa wrote a blurb for my book, which I was very grateful to her. Issa and I met each other when I was at 17, and she, it was before Insecure. It was before she was still doing YouTube videos of the misadventures, but before the big book had happened. And we met each other. We had a drink in a hotel in LA, and I really liked her energy. And we didn't need anything from each other. It wasn't a clear connection, right? We were sort of like, we thought we should know somebody thought we should know each other, and we had a drink, and I just liked what she was doing so much and wanted to support her, that I made her part of a council at 17 to support, we called it the Girl Power Council. And so she helped support the next generation of women. And then in return, when I wrote my book, she was happy to blurb it and to give it the support and love that it needs. And so I appreciate that so much. But that's another one of the of the key points of building your community is not only when it's going to do something for you.
Yeah.
Right? Like I didn't shine a light on Issa because I knew it was going to lead to anything, right?
Yeah.
Because I knew that 5 years down the road, I would ask her to do a blurb for my book. I shined a light on her because I thought she was doing amazing things. And so to take out that transactional part of networking and community and to just like shine on women that you think are amazing.
Yeah. And that's been, and yours, I was like, that's one of the biggest things that I believe in my values of being able to say, how do we actually build long-term connections, right? And I think that that's something that in the society that we live in now, unfortunately, things seem very transactional, or I'm gonna send you a DM and say, hey, this is who I am. I need this from you, without saying like, hold on, but the person on the other side is a person, number one. Number two, it's like going back to that, the servant type of leadership of like, how can I help you? How can I show up for you? And then again, doing it without the transactional piece. And so I do I would like to transition to some questions because we're getting a ton of them in. And Maria, and you've already shared a little bit about this, but maybe if you want to give it a different angle. And Maria's asking, how do you create long-lasting relationships in professional life? And maybe how do you make the first connection? So maybe we can talk a little bit about how do you reach out?
So I do it all the time. I either make connections for people or people make connections for me. But one of the things before this is a pre-COVID thing that I'm really hoping to get back to. So I want to just acknowledge that like quarantine has really put us in a hard spot with this. But the idea of creating rituals that allow people to come into your space and into your life. So I, as part of writing The Big Life and building out the Badass Babes communities, I hosted a series of dinners at my apartment. I did, in the process of writing the book, I've hosted 24 dinners, always just to give you the ritual piece of it. I made a killer cheese plate. I opened many bottles of rosé. And I served fancy frozen pizza. Like it was not, I didn't cook, right? I turned on the oven and then put pizzas out. And we had the most impactful conversations. And I probably did one a month for a couple of years. And I loved them so much. I kept doing them across the country. And they really evolved into almost like a salon, right? And it was sometimes I had something I wanted to talk about, right? I wanted to talk about side hustling, or I wanted to talk about the intersection of ambition and relationships. Sometimes I would meet one amazing woman and I would say, I want to meet your friends, invite a friend of a friend of a friend, right? And that way I always knew one, maybe two people at the table, but not very well. Yeah. But we all came together, and at the end of the dinner, pizza, wine, cheese, right? At the end of the dinner, we, women who didn't know each other felt very bonded to each other. There was a lot of openness around the table. And the dinners would go on for a couple of hours, right? We would have these, my husband and my children were sort of banished to another part of the apartment. And I was so grateful for them for doing that, right? But at the end, I was like, okay, you guys can come out and say hi. But that became a part of a ritual, right? So I always had something to invite somebody to. Come to my home, come with an idea, come invite people. And I really, in my book, there is a chapter that talks about the formula for creating your own Badass Babes dinner. I did it during quarantine. We did Badass Babes dinners on Zoom, right? And we didn't eat because I think eating on Zoom is a little weird. We tried it. We tried it a couple of times actually with eating, and it wasn't good, but you could have a glass of wine, right? Yeah. And you get Zoom fatigue, but an hour together with a glass of wine gives you a reason to connect. So that's what I recommend to get started and to build long-lasting relationships, is to have these kind of rituals. It doesn't happen by itself. You have to put some effort into it.
Yeah. I love that. And also just going back to what we were saying before, the sense of bringing people into your home, right? And so being able to say, hey, I'm also bringing down my barriers. You're able to see me in my most authentic self. So let's all show up authentically. Let's all have real conversation. And again, not have the focus be on transaction of like, I'm inviting you here because, but instead it's like, how can we get to learn about one another on a more human level, right? And then say, oh, well, we vibe. And then when something or an opportunity happens in the future, you'll actually have the foundation for what you need.
Yes.
Yeah, right. I love that. I love that. So we have about 20 minutes left, and we are getting a ton more questions into the chat. So a lot of women would love to hear about going back to the question of power and ambition. So those were some words that were really standing out. And someone asked, Nicole Felter, who's a ray of sunlight, she asked, how do you balance ambition and perfection? Sometimes it feels like this is a recipe for disaster.
I love this question. I mean, I don't love the underlying anxiety of the question, but I love that we can talk about it. So I've done a lot of work in talking about the intersection of ambition and anxiety and the ways in which they very often go together for women, right? This drive to achieve and succeed, very often we turn on ourselves. That means we have to be perfect in all ways. There's a chapter in The Big Life called The Pressure to Be Perfect. And sometimes that pressure manifests itself with a little like extra boost to get things done when you need to get it done. Sometimes it becomes self-sabotage, and it can lead to really damaging behaviors, eating disorders or self-harm. There's a lot of ways in which we can internalize this pressure to be perfect and feel really harmed by it. And particularly now, I mean, I think we can't underestimate the stress that the pandemic has put on everybody and the ways in which we have to be kind to each other, but particularly kind to ourselves. We have had to reset our entire way of thinking about what is possible and achievable. And at the same time, we are watching people get sick, people lose their jobs, people lose their homes, and maybe those things are happening to you. And so all of that, especially if you are ambitious, especially if you're used to being high achieving, all of that can be deeply unmooring. And so it sounds simple to say, give yourself grace, but also know that you are not alone. That a lot of people are suffering, that this idea of being perfect, we have to let go of it, right? We have to let go of the ways that we think things should be and deal with the reality of the way things are. Yeah. I really, I would like, Nicole, if you can find a copy of The Big Life and read The Pressure to Be Perfect and reach out to me and let me know if that resonates with you. Because to talk about ambition and mental wellness, it's a really crucial conversation. I led a similar conversation you might find online about, with Forbes last year or 2 years ago. I don't even know. Last year. No.
This time.
2019. I think in the fall of 2019,
okay.
Right before quarantine, I led a conversation for Forbes with some high-profile founders who were talking about the intersection of entrepreneurship and mental wellness, and just to acknowledge that you are in distress and that people around you could be in distress, and that to get help in some communities, in some communities, your therapist is your badge of honor. In some communities, to say that you are suffering is not okay. And that's what we really have to fight against, that we need help. We need help. You can't do it alone.
Huge. This is huge. And something that was really resonating with me is like, also when I think about Black women and women of color, or if you happen to be a child of immigrant, whatever that might be, whatever your situation is, like those extra nuances as well when we think about perfection. Also when we think about mental health, of saying, okay, well, I go to therapy. It's like, oh, but are you okay? Is something wrong? And I think that these are nuances that we also, when it comes back to thinking about our power, and when it comes back to also being 100% authentic, sharing those stories, right? Or sharing hardships, or saying, hey, I feel like I'm having these different dynamics of wanting to do a lot or grow my business or whatever that might be. but I'm also having anxiety attacks. I've never had anxiety attacks before, right? But talking about it more, I also think that that's a sense of power of being able to say, hold on, but being authentic and real, not just when things are good and great, but when things are hard as well, really kind of pulls back the curtain of being able to say, oh, well, we all are going through different struggles, but things that we can resonate with.
And to deal with it before it becomes self-sabotaging behavior. You know, it's additional pain to bounce back from or to have to deal with.
Mm.
But I really, I understand so well how the idea of perfection is so alluring. And we've done a real disservice to each other by talking about even imagining that there is an idea of perfection.
Yeah.
And this year more than ever, you're doing great. There's no perfection. Whatever you're doing, you got to Friday, you like got dressed, you got out of bed, like more power to you.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And again, just going back to that constant sense of like celebrating the small wins, right? When we think about it. And you actually gave a perfect transition because we got another question from Sarah, and she says she's interested in any tips you have when to get a feel. She's interested in knowing how can you get a sense of power back when something has knocked you down. So how to not let that experience take you down in a negative thought spiral. And so I know we just kind of covered that, but if you have any other tactical tips of like,
I want to talk about something that is really one of my favorite things to talk about, which is failure. And I don't believe in it. I don't believe in failure. And I am not here to talk about imposter syndrome. I don't understand how not knowing something became like a fatal disease. Like just the words we give things, the idea of calling it failure or calling it imposter syndrome makes it feel much worse than it is. And I say this to you as someone who, when something goes wrong or not the way I expected, or I find myself in a situation where I don't know what to do or don't feel worthy of that situation, I internalize it. I'm up agonizing all night long. Like I feel every single drop of that anxiety and that pain. But I will tell you that just by even this idea of fail fast, fail hard, fail quick, whatever, nonsense. It is okay for things to not go wrong. It's a process. That thing didn't go right. Okay, great. Don't do that again. Go think of what your goal was and find another way to get there. One of the things that I didn't used to talk about, but I have started to talk about is the fact that I was up to be editor-in-chief of a magazine twice before I became editor-in-chief of 17. And I used to think, just like this idea of perfection, I'd never say that. I wanted everybody to think I like magically was anointed and suddenly like my story was she was fully manifest as editor-in-chief of a legendary brand, and isn't that amazing, right? The two other steps along the way taught me how to do it right the third time. And I really, frankly, I thought the first one taught me how to do it right the second time, but that didn't work. And so the second time taught me how to get it right the third time. And I never would have been up for the third time if it hadn't been for the other two. And this is just one example of the ways in which you have to build on your build on your successes, find the win in the thing that went wrong, and continue to move forward. Maybe it showed you, maybe some idea of getting knocked down showed you don't like working with people who are like whatever, or that the thing that you wanted isn't really the thing you wanted, or maybe you just wanted it for the wrong reason. I can't tell you how many times I was like, oh, that's fun. I want to do that thing. Everybody else is doing that thing. Or, ooh, that thing looks like I'll make a lot of money doing that. And it's not the right thing. It didn't work because it wasn't the right thing and not the right reason. So I'm giving you like, I'm giving it all to you. But I'm telling you that I want you to feel it. I want you to agonize over it. And then I want you to figure out how to turn it into what's next for you next time, rather than holding on to the failure or the wound. That's how you grow. That's how you build a career. That's how you build yourself as a human being. That's growth.
Yeah. All the things that you were saying were resonating with me on so many different levels. And I love that because again, it goes back to intrinsic motivation of like, do you actually know what you want? Right. And then realizing that sometimes things just aren't meant for you because it's a part of your bigger story. Right. And so something that we try and do is we try to say, well, oh, well, if this didn't happen, then it means that X, Y, and Z. And we put that pressure on ourselves of saying, not just I had a failure or I had failure, right? But saying I am a failure, which is something that we do is like a lot of individuals happen to project when things don't necessarily go right on themselves instead of saying, no, hold on. But this happens for everyone. And I love the fact that you just shared or kind of pulled back the curtain on your story, because I think it's so important to hear that each time it's a learning opportunity, right?
And you don't want to say like the other part of it is it's not always somebody else's fault, right? It's not always your fault and it's not always somebody else's fault, but you have to look into what can you learn
Yeah.
so you can move forward.
I love it. I love it. I love it. This is fantastic. So speaking of moving forward, and also reinvention was something that was coming up to me when you were sharing a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that we are in a pandemic, like we've been talking about, but also the crisis that a lot of working families are experiencing right now. And we talked about this a little bit before, but when we think about power, and then also when we think about women in power, but the reality is that you actually wrote about this for Parents Magazine recently, right? About how the pandemic has changed the game. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about how can we use this as a time of reinvention, right? So how can we use this to really rethink and create greater equality and flexibility and opportunities for everyone?
Thank you for queuing up this part of the conversation, because the theme today is about returning to work. I did the cover story for Parents Magazine last month about the crisis that we are facing for working families, right? The fact that 1 million women have left the job force, and many of them because the pressures of balancing home and children without the support systems that we come to rely on for childcare, or even like grandparents, right? Can't see your grandparents, I can't dump my kids with my mom. And so, um, not dump. I'm sorry, that's not nice to my children. I can't enlist my mother to help me during this pandemic. And so, that we are really facing a tremendous crisis. And in reporting that story, a lot of experts said to me, listen, we could put ourselves back a decade for equality with the way that the trends are going. But at the same time, a lot of experts said we have an opportunity to rewrite the rules.
Yeah.
That this is the time to, one, if you are suffering at work, let your employee resource, let your HR, let your managers know that you need a different working system, that you need a different way to be evaluated, that you need that this is the moment. They don't want to lose you. This is the moment to be the squeaky wheel and to make a change that could be a long-lasting, sustainable change. Two, this is the moment that this is not necessarily only something that you can solve, right? That there is greater political will to make policy change. And three, that there are companies that are looking at how can they solve this. That my new favorite thing is fam tech, right? Technology that is becoming corporate employee benefits, that is going to help support working families. And suddenly companies are desperate to come up with these solutions. And so here they are. And so what is undoubtedly a crisis, undoubtedly. And I mean, it doesn't make you feel better as an individual human being to know that you are part of a larger trend, but to acknowledge that you are not alone in this, and this is not something that you can solve, that this problem is bigger than you. You cannot hack your way out of this. You can't lean in to solve this problem. There is some light at the end of the tunnel, right? There is an opportunity for us to reset the rules. And for individual women who are here on this call, you just need to hang on. right? You need to let your employee resource group know that you are there, that you are devoted, that you want to be part of the solution, but the solution has to happen at a greater systemic level than you can do. You can't, you just keep moving forward.
Absolutely. And it's actually interesting because what you were just speaking about reminds me of the conversation that we had at the beginning of I was going to say of the pandemic, of the summit, with the founder of Vote and talking about, okay, well, it starts with us, but then companies have to make change. And then thinking about how can you make change in legislation and all of these things. But again, going back to what you're saying of being able to not be afraid of speaking up, right? And I think that that's also something that happens in the workplace where women say, well, no, it's fine because I'm grateful to have a job, or it's fine because I'm grateful to have a position, or it's fine because X, Y, and Z, instead of saying, yes, things can be good, but also there's room for change. And I really do think that now is a time where more than ever companies are actually caring, right? And making change and backing it up with money and resources, et cetera. So don't be afraid to voice your opinion, to be able to say what you actually need and what can also help other individuals to thrive. And so you're resonating with this. So I want to give you space if you want to share something.
But yes, I mean, I think now is the time to speak up, and I would encourage the audience to find this story on parents.com, because there's a lot of great advice in there from a lot of women who are living it and who made changes in their lives, who made changes in their companies, who are leading changes for the country. And I want everyone to find the solution and the help and the support that they need to get more deeply engaged in their careers rather than finding themselves edged out.
Yeah, absolutely. This is huge. And I want to acknowledge you for your time. And I want to, before I have you share where everyone can find you, et cetera, I, again, just really want to say thank you for this amazing conversation, for sharing your thoughts, your expertise, your stories, and just being 100% you and having that be powerful in itself. And so I want to ask you one last question before we do transition out. If you had to give 3 pieces of advice, it could be one, but I love the number 3. If you had to give 3 pieces of advice to someone or to a woman who wants to step into their power, what would those 3 things be?
I think it's just one piece of advice.
Perfect.
I think it's one. Find your squad. Surround yourself with other people, other women who are devoted to helping you achieve and succeed. No one can get there alone. That it is hard. It is hard to do big things. It is hard to make the world see you. It is hard to have your expression it's hard to take a box that's here and say like, hey, the box needs to come here and look like me, right? Yeah. That is hard to do in the world, and you need support and you need ideas and you need other women. That this moment is about our success as women, and that old idea of competition, we don't have time for it. We have to help each other rise. Find your squad.
I love that. So for everyone who is listening out there, because I know that there's a ton of you, if you're engaging in the chat, find people who are resonating with you, connect with other women inside of the PowerToFly community, connect with Ann directly, connect with all of us. And so, Ann, how can people connect with you, learn more?
So I would love the Badass Babes. You can find Ann Shoket's Badass Babes on Facebook or at annshoket.com. The list is TheLi.st. We're a little cute like that. You can find me at Ann Shoket on Instagram and Facebook. I really would love to hear how this conversation connected with everyone. It's so important to me that we are serving what everybody needs in the world. And so if I can be of service, if I can help connect you with the tribe of women who are going to help you achieve and succeed, that would be my greatest pleasure. And honestly, for anyone out there who sees this new dynamic of power and wants to bring these thought leaders into your space, please reach out to me. We have the thought leaders who are redefining what it means to be powerful and successful in the world, and the future of work and the future of women. And I want to make those connections happen.
Oh, I love it. Well, and I'm extremely inspired from our conversation that we had today and feeling energized. So I just want to say thank you again for taking the time and for being a part of Diversity Reboot. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Meg.
Thank you so much, Sienna. I want to say a huge thank you to Ann and Sienna. Can we get a round of applause for our wonderful speakers?